Right, so it is one of the most important uh, instrument, that is spectrometer, right? Frequently they have asked questions regarding spectrometer, and many students don't have a clear understanding of the apparatus because it looks a bit complicated, right? But today I will explain you the spectrometer simply once and for all, right? Okay, so in the practical book it is 19 and 20. 19 and 20. So here we are going to, first we are going to adjust the spectrometer, right? So that is the difficult part. So once you adjust the spectrometer, you can easily take measurements. You can easily take, measure angles, right? So this, using spectrometer, you can easily measure angles very accurately. That's why this instrument is important, especially when it comes to experiments regarding light, right? Regarding light. Okay. Under spectrometer, right? Adjusting spectrometer. So that is what we are going to discuss first. Then we are going to measure refracting angle. You know the prism angle? That is capital A. Then third, you can measure angle of deviation. Using a prism, you can use angle of deviation. We call that simple D. You can write this with me, right? Take a note. You can write this with me. Then fourth, we are going to measure angle of minimum deviation. That is capital D. Okay. So that is what we are going to do. First, adjust the spectrometer. Once you adjust it, you can measure these angles. Refracting angle, angle of deviation, angle of minimum deviation. So that is what we are going to do here in this part, right? So a bit lengthy experiment, right? But bear with me, this has so many marks in the exam as well, right? So this is how this is simple sketch of the spectrometer. So in the spectrometer, it has a prism table. Some of you might have used this in the school. Anyway, it has a prism table like this. If you want, you can draw this with me. It is attached here. You can actually rotate the prism table around this bar. Then here you have a telescope attached. From this side, you have a telescope attached. So it is like this. We call this telescope. It is a usual telescope, right? I think you have learned telescope. We can name it as, we'll say telescope. Or we can name it as capital T, right? Just a telescope, which has an eyepiece and an objective piece. Then another part, to the stage of the spectrometer, there's a collimator. We call this part collimator. It also is a, we call this collimator. This is prism table, right? Prism table. From now on, I'll call this P, right? Collimator means capital C. You can take this down. So we have a collimator. prism table, and a telescope. So the telescope just has a objective lens and a eyepiece. I think you have learned telescopes already, right? Under optics, objective lens and an eyepiece. Then you have the prism table, capital P. Then there's the collimator. So the collimator is a new instrument. Collimator is just, it has a lens here, only one lens, and at the other side it has a slit. Slit means a thin opening, right? When you look, if you look from here, it is a thin, slit. Just an opening, right? Thin opening. We call that a slit. Actually, you can change the size of this slit using a screw here. You can rotate a screw, then you can change the size of the slit. When you are doing the experiment, this slit has to be very thin, as much as possible, right? Okay. So this is a simple edge case of the spectrometer. Images of a real spectrometer will be given on that PDF, right? If you check that. Okay. So besides these, there are screws attached here. For an example, this telescope, actually you can rotate this telescope around the prism table. Prism table also can be rotated independently from the telescope. Prism table and the telescope can be rotated independently from each other. But this collimator is fixed to the stage of the spectrometer, right? It is fixed to the stage of the spectrometer. They ask these in the exam, right? Only prism table and the telescope can be rotated independently. But the collimator is fixed. It cannot be rotated, right? It is fixed to the stage. Okay, did everyone draw that? Thumbs up if you have drawn it, right? So as I'm explaining, just take notes, right? We don't have that much time for you to take the note. So as I'm explaining, take notes, right? Okay. Everyone, did everyone do this? Thumbs up, right, if you have. Right. Under this, write down prism table, capital P, prism table, capital P, and telescope, capital T, can be moved independently. Can be moved independently. Prism table and telescope can be moved independently. Then to the same line, right? Collimator, capital C, is fixed. Collimator, capital C, is fixed to the spectrometer stage. Is fixed to the spectrometer stage. So it is like this, right? So you have the collimator here. Then you have the prism table. Around the prism table, this telescope can be moved. like this. From this side, this telescope can be moved 360 around the prism table. So is the prism table. But the collimator is fixed, right? You can draw this as well. Okay. Then we'll move on to how to do these adjustments. Adjustments is somewhat hard part, right? So you have to carefully listen how to do the adjustments to the spectrometer. So there is a order when you are doing adjustments. First, you have to adjust the telescope. First, you must adjust the telescope, then collimator, and finally you have to adjust the prism table. You cannot mix these up, right? You will understand once I'm done explaining this why that is. First you have to adjust telescope, then collimator, then prism table. You cannot mix that order, right? Below that, write order of adjustments. Order of adjustments, right? First one, write down telescope. Second one, write down collimator. And at the end, finally, prism table, capital P. You will understand why that is once I explain these adjustments, right? Telescope, collimator, and finally, prism table. Okay? So first you have to adjust the telescope. Write the subtopic telescope adjustment. Let's see how to do the telescope adjustment, right? So what do you mean by adjusting the telescope? So this is how the telescope is made, right? You have a objective lens in the telescope like this. Then in a separate tube, I mean pipe, it includes a crosswire, something called crosswire. You have seen when you look through a sniper, you can see two lines, right? Two perpendicular lines. Those are called crosswires. So here as well, you have these two crosswires, right? But it is in a separate tube. These can be moved independently. That's why then inside this tube, you have the another lens which we call eyepiece. Then it is closed here. So there are two pipes, I mean 3 pipes actually. You can change these independently. There are knobs and screws to do these changes, right? You can refer that PDF and identify those screws. I'm not going to explain those as well. Then you can look from here, right? You can look from here. Okay. Below this topic, write down. I'll explain after that. Below this topic, write after adjustment. After adjustment. Yeah. Exactly that. Same as in the traveling microscope, right? These just telescopes, right? After adjustment, T is only responsive to T means telescope, right? T is only responsive to parallel light. T is only responsive to parallel light. After adjustment, telescope is only responsive to parallel light. Underline parallel light. Underline parallel light. Okay? Right. So you have to make sure that this telescope only responds to the parallel light. Parallel light means what? Light coming from infinity. You have learned that those in optics, right? Light coming from infinity, those are parallel light, right? Parallel light beams. So the simple A, under adjustment telescope, we have subunits. Those subunits also should be done in order. So the first adjustment of the telescope also have subunits of adjustments, right? So the first adjustment is, so remember that we have to make sure that this only responds to parallel light. The first sub adjustment is you have to adjust the distance between eyepiece and the cross wires. So we'll call that simple A, right? Eyepiece and the cross wires. You know, you can actually move these by hand. You can change the direction. Looking through here like this, you can change the distance between cross wire and this. Okay? Then what you would see? Through here you see this one. We call this view field. You have to change this distance till you see these cross wires clearly. You only see these cross wires clearly. You have to change this distance. You can move this by hand actually, right? By hand. Looking through here till you see clear cross wires through this view field. Got it? Through this view field. So that is the first sub adjustment of the telescope, right? Quickly take this down. Quickly take this down. And once you take this down, thumbs up. This is the same telescope as in the traveling microscope, right? There's no difference. There are 3 pipes, right? Okay. If you are done, thumbs up. If you want, you can name this. This is objective lens. This is eyepiece. This is cross wires, obviously. Whole thing is the telescope, right? This whole thing is the telescope. First adjustment is between cross wires and eyepiece till you see clear image of the cross wires. If you are done, thumbs up, right? Quickly take it down. Right. Below this, right, take down this note, write down distance between eyepiece and cross wires, eyepiece and cross wires is adjustable because least distance of distinct vision least distance of vision least distance of distinct vision is different for each observer is different for each observer. Got it? So the manufacturer of the spectrometer could have fixed this length, right? Could have fixed this length, but they have given us the opportunity to change the distance between crosswire and eyepiece. Why is that? I think you may have learned that many of you capital D, that is least distance of distinct vision. You know that from observer to observer, from student to student, this value is different, right? Usually this value is 25 centimeters. This is the distance that you form the final image, distance from the eye. So that is about 25 centimeters average value. But from person to person it changes, right? So you would have to change this gap depending on the observer. Right? If you didn't understand, it doesn't matter. If you have learned that, if you have learned optical instruments, you will understand that. So you know that D value is an average value, that is a 25 centimeters. That is the least distance we can observe objects clearly. So when an object comes towards you, this distance is about 25 centimeters. If you bring it more closer than that distance, that image gets blurry, right? It gets blurred. So that is what least distance of distinct vision. So from person to person it is different. That's why this distance is adjustable, right? Okay, so this is the first sub adjustment of the telescope. So we have to do this first. You cannot do this for the second part, right? You have to follow this order. Okay. Then we didn't adjust the objective lens. The distance between objective lens and the cross wires also should be adjusted, right? Actually, to do that adjustment, there is a knob. You can rotate that knob and do that adjustment. Okay, this is how we do that. Before that, I have to tell you that you might not see cross wires like this line vertical and this line horizontal. When you observe through here, you might see it like this. It is tilted, right? Then what do? Actually, you can rotate this by hand and make these cross wires vertical and horizontal, right? You can rotate this by hand. There are grips around it. Holding from that grip, you can rotate that. Looking through here, till you see this becoming vertical and horizontal, the cross wires. You can draw this below that. A complete note is given in the PDF, right? You can just draw this one. You can tilt it. Do this by hand, looking through the this eyepiece. Just draw this. Okay. Then simple B. Simple B means you have to adjust the objective lens actually. Distance between objective lens. right? If you think about here, parallel rays coming from a distant, from infinity, gets converged to a point here. Actually, that point is the focus of this objective lens. Focus of this objective lens, right? Parallel rays gets converged to this focus. Focus here. Got it? But the what we have to do is you have to move this whole part so the crosswires will be on this focus. So that is the another adjustment. So the crosswires here. Eyepiece here. Then what do you see? These parallel rays coming from here converged onto the crosswires. Then gets incident here, then here. When you arrange it like this, now the view field, you are looking through here, right? By rotating this, you can change this distance. When you look the view field, what do you see? So let's say you observe a distant tree. Distant tree means the tree is at infinity. A tree is at infinity. So in the lab, you can use through a window, you can focus a tree, right? Through a window. I mean, you can rotate this telescope. Usually telescope and the collimator are facing each other, right? You can rotate the telescope and point towards a distant object. After that, you do this adjustment till you see a clear image of a, let's say, distant tree. It can be any object, let's say distant tree. So on the view field, you see an inverted image of the tree, right? You know that real images are inverted here through a telescope. So till you see a clear image of a distant object on the crosswires clearly, you have to adjust this knob. So this distance will be changing. This distance changes, right? So this is the second adjustment. So this is the second adjustment. Now what do you see? Now these rays are parallel rays. So now the telescope responds only to parallel rays, right? Only parallel rays creates the image. So this is only sensitive to the parallel light, right? Now the adjustment is complete. Okay. Draw this one. If you have drawn that, thumbs up, right? Have you drawn that? If you have drew that, thumbs up, right? Previously you drew this. You only have to draw this one, right? Okay. Below this, write down. Now the telescope is only responsive to parallel light. Okay, parallel light. Telescope is only responsive to parallel light. Meaning now this only responsible to parallel light means now it is fully adjusted, right? Telescope is adjusted. So now you have to understand why do we do this as first step and this as second step, right? Before taking this image onto the crosswires, you need to see crosswires, right? First you need to clearly see the crosswires. Then only you can take the image onto the crosswires, right? So these two steps should be in order, okay? Without seeing crosswires, you cannot take the image to the crosswires, okay? So those two are the adjustments, sub adjustments for the telescope in order. Okay. Then collimate adjustment. Then write down the topic. See collimator adjustment. Collimator adjustment. Okay. Listen carefully, right? Listen carefully. Now you know that the telescope is only responsive to parallel light, right? So you have this telescope, it is adjusted now, right? The telescope is adjusted. It is only responsive to parallel light. Right? So from the collimator, what do you mean by adjusting the collimator? Adjusting the collimator means the collimator should only produce parallel light. Got it? Parallel light means all the light rays coming from the collimator should be parallel to each other. So you can send those light beams into the telescope. Understood? So that is what we call by adjusting the collimator. The collimator should only produce parallel light. Under this collimator adjustment, write down after adjustment, collimator after adjustment, comma, collimator should only produce parallel light. After adjustment, collimator should only produce parallel light. Okay? So I told you about the collimator, right? Earlier, little bit. So collimator is also just a pipe, like the similar to telescope. This pipe contains a small opening, thin opening, we call this slit. So when you look from this side, you see something like this. And there's a knob here. By rotating the knob, you can change the thickness of that opening, right? You can change the thickness. So this also is two separate pipes, right? One pipe which includes the slit and another pipe which includes a lens. Another pipe includes the lens, just a one lens. So these two can be moved independently. For this as well, there's a knob, right? A large knob. You can rotate that. You can change the distance between the slit and the lens. So through this lens, through this slit, there's a light beam coming like this, right? Light beam through a small slit, light beam comes like this, right? A light beam comes like this. So this lens, by changing the distance, if this is the focal length of this lens, you can actually produce parallel rays. If this is the focal length of this lens, you can create these parallel rays. You understand that? If a diverging light rays comes like this, and if you have a lens here, converging lens, given that the light rays goes through the focus of this lens, after the refraction from the lens, those light rays would be parallel, right? Okay. So by changing these two, the distances, you can produce this parallel light. You can produce the parallel light. So how do we know that this has produced parallel light? You see that you need to see this. So that also should be observed through the telescope. So everything you are doing everything. You cannot see these rays you cannot see, right? Everything is observed through the telescope. Everything is observed through the telescope. So if you see a thin image of this slit like this, meaning of that is these light rays from the slit, parallel light rays comes through the telescope to create this clear image of the slit, right? So for the collimate adjustment also, to check whether the collimate is adjusted, you have to observe through the telescope to check whether the collimate is adjusted. So now you can clearly understand why should we do the telescope adjustment first, right? Right. Draw this one. Take down this. There's a light source as well, right? This could be a monochromatic or a white light, depending on the experiment. There's this light source. Then the collimator. This is the telescope. Take that down. Okay. So now we have adjusted the collimator. Now you can understand why telescope adjusted first, right? Because we use telescope to check whether other things are adjusted, right? Whether the collimator is adjusted. That's why we had to adjust telescope first, right? Right. Then the third one, write down level in the prism table. Level in the prism table. Third part, level in the prism table. Capital P. Level in the prism table. Okay. So the prism table is something like this, right? You just have a plate like this, just a plate. And below that plate, you have 3 screws. You have 3 screws like this. Goes through here and comes out like this. So these points of the screws are in an equilateral triangle. Then above this, there's another circular plate. So you can place this plate on those screws. There are 3 dents as well, right? There are 3 dents. So you can put these 3 screws like this, right? You can place this plate on top of these screws. There are 3 dents, so this plate wouldn't slip off, right? So you can just place it here. Then by rotating these screws, can you understand, like you can those 2 plates are like this, right? By rotating the screws, you can change the orientation of the above plate like this. You can change, right? So these dents are in an equilateral triangle actually. Equilateral triangle. Quickly draw this one. Equilateral triangle. Clearer images on the PDF, right? So these are equilateral. This is in an equilateral triangle. Quickly draw that. Okay. Below this right, after leveling the prism table, after leveling, prism table and rotational plane of telescope. Prism table and rotational plane of telescope should be parallel. Okay. So what is this rotational plane of telescope? Okay, now I only draw one plate, right? But there are 2 plates here. So this is the simple sketch. You have the telescope here. To the telescope, then you have the collimator here. Collimator here. You can draw this with me. Here you have the prism table, and then you have the telescope. Then here you have the collimator. Collimator, telescope, and the prism table. This is the right? So the thing is, you have to level this prism table. Leveling the prism table does not mean you have to make it horizontal. It does not mean making it horizontal, right? You can easily make it horizontal by, if you have a spirit level here, You can easily make it horizontal, but it is not what we are going to do here. So this is the most important part here, right? Leveling the prism table. They asked many questions from this. Leveling the prism table means the prism table and the rotational plane of telescope. You know that telescope can be rotated like this, right? So the rotational plane of telescope is like this. This is what we call rotational plane of telescope. That plane is not visible, right? But that is the plane that the telescope rotates, like this. Once you level the prism table and the rotational plane of telescope should be parallel. Should be parallel. That's the requirement, right? So this is rotational plane of capital T. So that is the what we call adjustment of prism table, right? So that is the requirement. I didn't explain how to do that. First you have to understand what it means, right? Then I'll explain how to do that. So if someone asks what is the leveling of prism table means? Leveling of prism table means rotational plane of telescope and prism table should be parallel. So that is the leveling of prism table. Done, right? This one? Taking it down? If you are taking it down, thumbs up. Just quickly take this down, right? The clear images on the PDF. Thumbs up if you are done. Okay, did you draw that? Right. So the leveling of prism table means the prism table and the rotational plane of telescope should be parallel to each other. So that is the goal here. That is what we are going to do. Right. So to do that, we need to use a prism. Now we are going to use a prism. You can take this with me. You place the prism like this on the prism table. So we call this prism table because we place the prism, right? 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 You place a prism on this prism table. So that is the first step. So that is the first step. Then you look from above. So the image I am going to draw is when you see from above the orientation of the prism. Then there is a special way. Now listen carefully, okay? A special way that you have to place this prism on the prism table. There's a special way. Listen carefully, right? Okay. So this is the prism table. So you know that these are the positions of screws. Let's say S1, S2 and S3. These are the 3 positions of the screws. Remember? Those positions are actually marked, right? Let's say the center of the prism is, prism table is here. Center of the prism table, I'll say O. Center of the prism table is O, and the positions of screws S1, S2 and S3. Now you are given a prism, you have to place that on this prism table. So how do you do that? So this is the procedure, right? So for a prism, you have to get the refracting edge. Refracting edge means the edge which includes the prism angle, right? So for the experiment, just one side of the prism is roughened, right? So you clearly identify the refracting edge. This edge is the refracting edge. The refracting edge should be closer to the center of the prism table, like this. And one side of the prism should be normal to one of these lines. S1, S2, or S1, S3, S2, S3. One of those lines, one of the edge should be perpendicular, right? Other point is this refracting edge should be closer to the center. So it is like this. Let's say this is S1, S2. So these are in an equilateral triangle, right? S1, S2, S3. Then let's say you place the prism like this. One side of the prism is perpendicular to one of these lines. I'll just take S1, S2 line, right? To be perpendicular like this. So this is the roughened surface. Roughened surface. Understood? So let's say this is P, Q, R. So this is how you place it. Got it? When you draw this line, one side of the prism is perpendicular one of these lines of the screws. Those screws are in an equilateral triangle. So one side is perpendicular to the edge of the prism. One side of the prism. It can be any of these sides, right? It can be either PQ or PR, but I placed it as PQ. So that is the first requirement. Perpendicular and center near the refracting edge. So those are the first requirement. So P close to center, and you can write this PQ perpendicular to S1, S2. So that is the first requirement when you are placing the prism. Right? Then the second one, I'll say that before that just take this down and thumbs up, right? They ask many questions from this, right? So I have to understand, and if you have any problem, let me know. Just take this down and thumbs up. Right, so the first point, P close to center O and PQ perpendicular to S1, S2. Take it, write that down, first point. Then the second point write down, by rotating prism table, light from collimator should be incident on both surfaces of prism symmetrically. Okay. Now you rotate this prism table, right? Now you rotate the prism table. Then you will see something like this. You rotate this. So you have the collimator here. So from the collimator you get parallel light, right? From the collimator you get parallel light. So let's say center is here. You don't touch the prism now, right? You have already placed the prism. Then you rotate the prism table. You can rotate the prism table, right? Then the prism also turns with the prism table. And it would have an arrangement like this. Got it? Now the S1, S2 lines also gets rotated. Let's say it is like this. S1 here, S2 here. Still perpendicular, right? S1, S2, then S3 here. Now that is the next requirement. The light coming from collimator is incident symmetrically on both sides. Then this light gets reflected. You know, this is a partial reflection actually. Part gets refracted into the prism, but about 20% gets partially reflected, right? Then you can rotate the telescope to this position and catch this light ray. So let's say that is T1, position T1. So when you look through here, what do you see in the view field? You need to see a slit, image of the slit through the view field at this location, right? You might see this like this, right? Not horizontally, it is like moved upwards a little bit, like this, right? You have to make it symmetrical around this crosswire. So I have to move it downwards, right? You can do that by rotating these screws. You only rotate either S1 or S2. You don't rotate S3, right? I'll explain why that is. First, you either rotate S1 or S2. Then you can bring that image downwards a little bit. So it is something like this, right? So this acts as a mirror. This side of the prism acts as a mirror. So if the light ray comes like this, right? Let's say this is a mirror. This is a mirror. Light ray comes like this and gets reflected. If you rotate the mirror like this, right? If you rotate the mirror like this, that image goes up or down. But if you rotate the mirror like this at the same place, the position of the image does not change. Position of the image does not change. If you rotate the mirror like this, position does not change, right? Because the light ray would come like this and gets reflected. But if you change it like this, then the position of the image would go up or down. Same thing happens here. If you rotate S3, this edge would get tilted like this at the same place. The position of the image does not change in that case. But if you change either S1 or S2, rotate S1 or S2, these sides gets rotated like this. Then you can make this arrangement into symmetrically like this here. Right? So the first step is you have to rotate either S1 or S2. Either S1 or S2, not S3. Right? That's why we do that. So S1, S2 is perpendicular to this edge. You rotate either S1 or S2 in order to make this symmetrical like this. Right. So let's say you made it symmetrical. Then you know that this ray coming from the other side of the collimator also gets reflected like this. You can rotate the telescope to this side and catch that ray. Now you will see a view field like this. Still it is not symmetrical, right? It is not symmetrical. Then you don't touch S1 or S2. You have already adjusted S1 and S2, right? If you rotate S1 and S2, this orientation changes. So you are not going to change S1 or S2, right? You have a remaining screw, that is S3. So once you take this to T2 position, you change S3, not S1 or S2. You rotate S3. Understood? Then you can make it symmetrical like this. You can bring this downwards. If it is not symmetrical, you can bring it down like this. Now we can make sure that the prism table is leveled, right? Okay, take this down, and once you've taken it down, thumbs up. Okay, below this, write down at T1, rotate either S1 or S2, till the image is symmetrical. At T1, rotate either S1 or S2 till the image is symmetrical. Another point, move the telescope, move the telescope to T2 position, to T2 position, comma, only use S3, only use S3 if the image is not symmetrical, if the image is not symmetrical. Okay, if the image is not symmetrical, right? So now we have fully adjusted the spectrometer. We have adjusted the spectrometer, right? So first we did the telescope adjustment. For the telescope adjustment also it had, first we adjusted distance between cross wires and eyepiece, then distance between eyepiece and cross wires for the second part. So we completed telescope adjustment. So that is the first adjustment. Then we adjusted collimator. Collimator adjustment means distance between objective lens and slit. After that, you would see a clear image of a distant object on the crosswires. Then we can say the telescope is fully adjusted. I mean telescope and the collimator. So once the collimator is adjusted, you see a clear image of the slit on the crosswires. Once you finish both telescope and collimator adjustments. Then we did the prism table adjustment. So that is what we just did. Now the spectrometer is fully adjusted. So once we adjust that, now you can take readings. Reading means you can measure the angles between light rays using the spectrometer. Under this, right, measuring